The alien queen bursts into tears as a human soldier returns her missing daughter. The gunfire had stopped 3 minutes ago, but Corporal Nathan Briggs was still breathing hard when he kicked open the door to the holding cell. The room smelled like rust and cold metal, emergency lighting through everything in pale red. And there, curled in the corner behind a cracked water pipe, was a small creature he had not expected to find. She was not human. Her skin was the color of the deep ocean at night, shifting slightly between blue and green depending on how the light hit her. She had 4 fingers on each hand, wide amber eyes, and 2 small ridges running along her cheekbones that pulsed faintly like she was scared. She was about the size of a 10-year-old child, but something in the way she held herself told Nathan she was younger than that. She pressed herself harder into the corner when he walked in. "Hey," he crouched down, lowering himself to her level. He set his rifle against the wall where she could see it, far from his hands. "I am not going to hurt you." She said nothing. Her eyes moved from his face to the rifle and back again. "My name is Nathan. I am a soldier, yeah, but not the kind you have been dealing with." He tilted his head toward the hallway behind him where 3 bodies in gray armor were still cooling. "Those guys worked for a trafficking ring called the Hollow Chain. You know that name." The small creature blinked slowly. One of the ridges on her cheek pulsed twice fast. "I take that as a yes." Nathan sat down fully on the floor, cross-legged, trying to look as harmless as a 200-pound man in combat gear could look. "We have been tracking this place for 8 months. Did not expect to find anyone alive in here, if I am honest." Still she said nothing, but she had stopped pressing herself into the corner. He reached into his chest pocket and pulled out a compact ration bar, the kind that came in silver foil. He placed it on the floor between them and slid it gently toward her, not all the way, just closer. "It is just food, probably tastes terrible. My unit sergeant says it tastes like cardboard that gave up on life." He paused. He is not wrong. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then one of her small hands crept forward and touched the silver foil. She did not pick it up. She just touched it, like she was testing whether it was real. "What is your name?" he asked. She looked at him. When she finally spoke, her voice was a sound between a whistle and a word, layered and soft. His translator patch on his collar crackled once and then rendered it. "Lyra," it said. "Lyra," he repeated carefully. "That is a good name." The building groaned somewhere above them. Dust sifted from the ceiling. Nathan glanced up, then back at her. His squad was supposed to have the upper floors secured, but this place had already given them 2 surprises tonight, and he had learned not to trust a quiet building. "We need to move," he said. "Is there anyone else in here with you? Anyone else who needs help?" She shook her head. The ridges on her cheeks went flat, which he somehow understood without needing a translation. Sadness. There had been others. He picked up his rifle, slung it over his shoulder barrel down, the way they taught you when you wanted to look less threatening, and he stood up slowly. Then he held out his hand. "I am going to get you out of here, Lyra. I promise you that." She looked at his hand for a long time. He kept it there, steady, not moving, not pushing. Outside, somewhere far down the corridor, he could hear his squadmate Corporal Denise Farrow calling for a sitrep on the radio. Then Lyra reached out and put her small hand in his. Her fingers wrapped around 2 of his because that was all she could reach, and her grip was surprisingly firm. He walked slowly, not pulling, letting her set the pace. When they reached the doorway and she saw the hallway, she flinched. He stopped immediately. "Take your time," he said. She swallowed. He could see it clearly in her slender throat. Then she took 1 step forward, and then another, and then she was walking beside him through the dark corridor, holding his hand and watching every shadow. Denise was waiting at the stairwell exit with her helmet off, which was a smart instinct on her part. She took 1 look at the child beside Nathan, and her whole face shifted into something quieter and more careful than her usual expression. "Extraction in 4 minutes," she said softly. "Everyone else is topside." Good, Nathan glanced down at Lyra. We are going outside, fresh air. Is that okay? Lyra looked up at him. The amber in her eyes caught the red emergency light and turned it into something almost warm. Fresh air, the translator rendered, in a voice that was small and wondering, like she had not expected to be allowed to have it again. They went up the stairs together, the three of them, and when the blast door opened and the cold night rushed in and the stars were suddenly visible overhead, Lyra stopped walking. She stood there and looked up at the sky with an expression Nathan had no word for. He looked up too for a second. It was a clear night over the outer station colony, more stars than he ever saw back home. Yeah, he said quietly. I know. He let her look for exactly as long as she needed to. Denise stood to the side and did not say anything either. That was one of the things Nathan had always liked about her. Then Lyra took a breath, squeezed his fingers once, and started walking again. The transport was waiting at the end of the landing strip. Lieutenant Cole Hargrove was standing outside it with a medic, both of them watching Nathan approach with the small alien child. Cole said nothing when Nathan walked up. He just stepped aside to make room. The medic crouched down in front of Lyra with a scanner and a voice so soft it was almost a whisper. Hi there. I am just going to make sure you are okay. Is that all right? Lyra looked at Nathan. It is all right, he said. She is trying to help. Lyra turned back to the medic and gave a small, careful nod. Nathan stood beside her the whole time. She never let go of his hand. On the transport, once they were airborne and the lights were dim and warm and the engines were just a low hum beneath them, Cole Hargrove leaned over and said, very quietly, You know who she is. Nathan looked at him. Cole pulled up his datapad and turned the screen toward him. There was an image on it, a broadcast alert from 6 weeks ago, from a source Nathan recognized immediately. The name above the image made him go completely still. Queen Sira of the Velhari sovereignty, Cole said, is offering an open negotiation to any party with information about the disappearance of her daughter. Nathan looked down at Lyra, who had finally fallen asleep against his side, her small hand still loosely wrapped around 2 of his fingers. He looked back at Cole. Get me a communications channel, he said. Secure line, and get me someone who speaks Velhari. Cole was already moving. The communication request took 11 hours to reach the right people, and another 6 hours after that before anyone in the Velhari government believed it was not a ransom demand or a trick. Nathan spent most of those 17 hours in a small briefing room on the transit station, eating bad coffee and waiting, while Lyra was in the medical bay down the hall being properly examined and fed and given a room with a window. The medic, a woman named Lieutenant Carla Odom, came to find him on the second morning. She keeps asking for you, Carla said without preamble. How is she? Nathan asked. Malnourished, dehydrated, some soft tissue bruising on her wrists and ankles, probably from restraints. Nothing permanent. She is going to be fine physically. Carla paused. Emotionally is going to take longer. She will not sleep unless someone is in the room, and she keeps asking where you are. Nathan stood up. She can understand standard language now, he asked. Enough. She is picking it up fast. Smart kid. Carla tilted her head. You can come sit with her for a while if you want, it would help. He followed her down the corridor. When he stepped into the medical bay, Lyra was sitting up in the bed with a tray of food in front of her that she had only half finished. She was wearing a soft gray medical shirt that was too big for her shoulders. When she saw Nathan, the ridges on her cheeks rose slightly and the color of her skin shifted toward a warmer, lighter shade, like someone turning up the brightness on a screen. He pulled a chair up to the side of the bed and sat down. How are you doing? He asked. Better, she said. Her standard language was careful and deliberate, each word placed with intention. The food is strange. But warm. Strange and warm is pretty good, he said. She looked at him with those wide amber eyes. You found me, she said. It was not a question. It was more like she was still getting used to the fact of it. "Yeah," he said. "Why?" He thought about how to answer that. A simpler soldier might have said something about duty or orders or the mission. Nathan was a simpler soldier in a lot of ways, but not that one. "Because no one should be left in a room like that," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over to her tray and picked up a small orange fruit that the kitchen staff had included, probably not knowing what species she was and just trying to cover all the options. She held it out to him. He took it. He did not eat it, just held it in his palm. "My mother," Lyra said slowly, trying the standard words, "is going to want to meet you." "I know," he said. "We are working on arranging that." "She is going to cry," Lyra said. "She cries when she is very afraid and very angry and very relieved. All three look the same from the outside." A pause. "She is going to do all three." "That is fair," he said. Lyra looked at the orange fruit still sitting in his hand. "Are you afraid of her?" He considered the question honestly. Queen Sira of the Velhari sovereignty was one of the most powerful figures in the non-human political sphere. She commanded a fleet that could occupy 3 star systems simultaneously. She had, according to his intelligence briefing, personally ended the career of a galactic trade representative who had insulted her in a public forum, using nothing but diplomatic procedure and a very calm voice. "A little," he admitted. Lyra made a sound that the translator did not render into words. It sounded, against all odds, like a very small laugh. "Good," she said. "She will like you better for that." The door at the far end of the corridor opened, and Lieutenant Cole Hargrove's voice carried through. "Briggs, we have a response." Nathan stood up. He looked down at Lyra. "I will be back." She nodded once and her hand dropped to the blanket beside her. She did not grab his hand this time. She just watched him go. He figured that meant something. The response from the Velhari sovereignty had come through their diplomatic relay, which was faster and more secure than the standard military communications band. Cole pulled it up on the main screen in the briefing room, and Nathan stood in front of it with his hands at his sides. The face on the screen was not what he had expected. Queen Sira of the Velhari sovereignty was tall. That was the first thing. She was taller than anyone Nathan had seen who was not in a power frame. Her skin was a deeper, darker ocean shade than her daughter's, and the ridges along her cheeks were broader and more pronounced. Her eyes were amber, just like Lyra's, but older, carrying something compressed and heavy behind them that Nathan recognized, because he had seen it on the faces of soldiers who had been waiting too long for news. She was dressed in something that was probably formal, but Nathan could not read Velhari court fashion well enough to know what exactly. What he could read was the tension in her jaw and the careful control in the set of her shoulders. "You contacted our government," she said, in standard language that was precise and formal and completely without warmth, "with a claim regarding my daughter." "Yes, Your Majesty," Nathan said. "Prove it." He nodded to Cole, who had a small screen set up behind the camera. On it, Lyra's face appeared, live from the medical bay. She had been told this might happen. She raised one hand and touched the 2 ridges on her right cheek in a gesture that Nathan did not understand but clearly meant something specific, because the Queen's composure changed in an instant. It did not break, but it shifted. Something moved behind those amber eyes that was enormous and very old and very much like watching a mountain decide whether to tremble. "Lyra," the Queen said very quietly. "Mother," Lyra said. Her voice through the translator came out clear and steady, but Nathan could hear the layers under it that the machine flattened, and he thought she was being very, very brave. Then the Queen made a sound that Nathan had never heard from any person of any species. It was low and not entirely controlled. The ridges on her face went wide and flat and then came back up again. And the color of her skin shifted in a wave, from deep ocean blue to something almost white, and then back, like something enormous inside her had briefly surfaced. She is safe, Nathan said. She is in medical care. She is going to be fine. The Queen looked at him directly. You are the soldier who found her, she said. Yes, Your Majesty. You are going to bring her to me. It was not a question. It was not even exactly an order. It was the statement of someone who had already decided that this was how reality was going to work now. Yes, Your Majesty, Nathan said, as soon as she is cleared by our medics. The Queen stared at him for a long moment. The control in her face was extraordinary. Every muscle was held in place by what was clearly an enormous act of will. What do you want in return? She asked. Nathan blinked. Nothing. Silence. That is not an answer I accept, the Queen said. I know that is probably hard to believe, he said, but it is the truth. Her eyes narrowed. You are a soldier of the Terran military. Yes. Your government did not send you to find her. No, we were raiding a trafficking operation. Finding her was not the mission. And yet here you are. Yes, Your Majesty. She studied him. He held still and let her do it. He had been studied by commanding officers and enemy snipers, and once by a very suspicious customs agent on Kell Station. And he had learned that the best thing to do in all of those situations was to be exactly what you were and not flinch. I will send a diplomatic escort, she said finally. They will arrive at your station within 30 hours. We will be ready, he said. She looked past him or past the camera toward where she knew Lyra's feet had been. Tell her, the Queen said, and her voice dropped one register just slightly, that I will be there. I will tell her, Nathan said. The connection closed. Cole let out a breath from the corner of the room that sounded like it had been held for quite a while. That went well, he said. Nathan was not sure well was the right word. He was not sure there was a right word yet. He turned and went back down the corridor to the medical bay, and when Lyra looked up at him with those amber eyes, he sat down beside her and said, Your mother is coming. The ridges on Lyra's cheeks rose all the way up, and her skin went through 3 different shades in fast succession, and then she turned to look out the window at the stars. I know, she said, I could tell from your face. He thought that was probably the most alien and most human thing anyone had ever said to him. He sat with her until she fell asleep, and then he stayed anyway, because Carla had said she slept better when someone was in the room. He was a soldier. Staying somewhere uncomfortable was most of the job. Outside, the station moved through the dark between star systems, carrying all of them forward toward whatever came next. The Velhari diplomatic escort arrived in 28 hours, not 30, which Nathan took as a sign that someone on the other side of the negotiation had been impatient. The ship that docked at Station Halcyon's outer bay was not subtle. It was long and dark blue, almost the same shade as Lyra's skin, with markings along its hull that the station's identification system flagged as royal insignia. The crew who came through the docking collar were tall and precise, and uniformed in the same ocean tones, and they moved through the station with the particular kind of measured grace that came from being trained never to look rushed even when you were. Nathan met them at the collar with Lieutenant Cole Hargrove beside him and Lieutenant Carla Odom behind them both, because Carla had decided she was part of this, and nobody had the energy to disagree with her. The head of the diplomatic escort was a tall Velhari officer whose name translated roughly to something like Commander Addy's. He looked Nathan over with eyes that were a slightly greener shade of amber than Lyra's, and then said, in clipped but precise standard language, "Where is the princess?" "She is resting," Nathan said. "We can take you to her." Addy's looked like he would have preferred to simply retrieve Lyra and leave immediately, but he was a diplomat as well as a soldier, and something in his training overcame that impulse. "Lead the way," he said. They walked through Halcyon's corridors in a line that attracted a lot of looks from the station crew, who had not been told much about what was happening in the medical bay, and were now piecing it together from the evidence of 10 formal Velhari escorts moving at parade pace through their facility. At the door to Lyra's room, Nathan stopped. He turned to Addie's. "She knows you are here," he said. "Carla told her this morning, but she has been through a lot and I want to give her a moment before you go in." Addie stiffened slightly. He was clearly not accustomed to being asked to wait at doors. But he also clearly remembered who had found the princess and who had kept her safe and who she had chosen to trust, and something in that arithmetic moved his sense of protocol enough for him to say, "Of course." Nathan knocked on the door. "Yeah," Lyra's voice came through, steady and clear. He opened it. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, dressed in a soft tunic that Carla had found from the station's supply that was closer to her size than the medical shirt had been. The color was pale gray-green, and it happened to be not too far from her own skin tone. She had her hands folded in her lap, and she was sitting very straight, which Nathan had come to recognize as her version of bracing herself. "Commander Addis is here," he said, "and his team. They are going to take you home." She looked at him. "Are you coming?" "Not today," he said. "I have to debrief with my own people first." Something moved in her face, not fear, something older and quieter. "Will you come later?" "If your mother invites me," he said. Lyra held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once with the particular gravity of someone who has decided to trust a thing they cannot fully control. "She will invite you," she said. He stepped back from the door, and Commander Addis entered. There was a moment of formal acknowledgement between Addis and Lyra that Nathan did not entirely follow. Gestures and sounds that had layers the translator only caught the surface of. And then two of the escorts came forward and arranged themselves on either side of her. Not crowding, just present. And Lyra walked out of the medical bay with her head up. She paused beside Nathan in the doorway. She said something in Velhari. The translator rendered it as, "The stars are there for everyone." He was not entirely sure what that meant, but he thought it was something kind. He said, "Yeah, take care of yourself, Lyra." She walked out with the escorts, and Nathan stood in the corridor and watched her go. Carla appeared beside him with a cup of coffee that had been poured several minutes ago and had gone slightly cold. She handed it to him anyway. "You know she is going to put your name in front of that queen," she said. "I know," he said. "And the queen is going to want to meet you." "I know. Are you ready for that?" He drank the cold coffee. It was still bad. It was always bad on station deployments. "No," he said, "but I will be." Carla nodded. "Good answer." He went to his debrief. It lasted 4 hours and covered 17 separate incidents from the Hollow Chain raid, of which finding Lyra was technically item 11 on the incident log. The debrief officer, a major named Garvin Shade, kept returning to the question of what Nathan had said on the communications call with the Queen, specifically the part where he had turned down any compensation. "You understand," Major Shade said carefully, "that you may have created a diplomatic moment." "I understand that," Nathan said. "The Velhari sovereignty is not a small political entity." "I understand that also." "And you told their queen you wanted nothing." "Because I wanted nothing," Nathan said. "I found a kid alone in a holding cell. I got her out. That is the job." Shade looked at him for a long time. "You know the job description does not technically include alien royalty." "I know," Nathan said. But the cell did not say anything on the door about who was inside it. Shade made a note on his datapad that Nathan could not read. Then he looked up. "The official position of the Terran military," Shade said, "is that you acted appropriately and with distinction. There will be a commendation filed." A pause. "There is also, as of this morning, a formal diplomatic inquiry from the Velhari sovereignty requesting your presence at the royal court for a ceremony of gratitude." Nathan went very still. "Your presence specifically," Shade continued. "By name, Corporal Nathan Briggs. They spelled it correctly, which I understand required 2 messages back and forth with our linguistics office." Nathan breathed out slowly. "What do I say?" he asked. Shade's expression, which was usually the professional flatness of a career military administrator, shifted slightly into something that might have been amusement if you looked at it from the right angle. "You say yes," Shade said. They left for Velhari space 2 weeks later, on a ship that was considerably nicer than any transport Nathan had been on before, because the Velhari sovereignty had offered to provide passage and the Terran military had accepted. And apparently the Velhari idea of passage involved staterooms and a dining facility that produced actual hot food with actual flavor. Carla came because she had made a compelling medical argument for continuity of care, and also because she had simply told Major Shade she was going, and he had decided not to push the point. Cole came because Cole was Nathan's partner and had been since the academy, and nobody expected anything different. The journey took 4 days. Nathan spent most of the first day in his stateroom reading everything the military intelligence database had on the Velhari sovereignty, which was a lot, and most of it was fascinating, and some of it was alarming, and all of it made him feel very aware that he was a corporal from Wisconsin, who had stumbled into a situation that should probably have involved several diplomats and at least one interstellar negotiator. On the second day, he went to the ship's observation deck and stood looking out at the stars for a while, and a Velhari crew member came and stood nearby, not talking, just also looking at the stars. After a few minutes, the crew member said, in the precise and careful standard language that seemed characteristic of Velhari speech, "The princess says you talk to her, when no one else would." Nathan looked at the crew member. "She told you about it." "She has told everyone about it," the crew member said, without any particular emphasis. "She says you sat on the floor." Nathan thought about that. The floor seemed like the right call. "Yes," the crew member said, in a tone that suggested this was a matter of deep significance. Then they nodded once and walked away. On the third day, Lyra appeared via a communications channel that the ship facilitated, her face on a screen in a small lounge at the end of the corridor. She looked different than she had on the station. Better fed, certainly. She had something around her neck that was probably formal jewelry, small and dark blue, and her skin had settled into a steady and relatively warm shade that was a different register than the shifting, stressed tones he had seen in the holding cell. "My mother has been preparing," Lyra said. "Preparing how?" Nathan asked. "She has been reading everything about humans," Lyra said, with an expression that the ridges on her cheeks turned into something just shy of amusement. "She knows about Wisconsin." Nathan paused. "That is a very specific piece of research," he said. "She is thorough," Lyra said, with the tone of someone who had grown up knowing exactly how thorough their parent was. "Is she going to ask me about Wisconsin?" "Probably not," Lyra said. "She will ask about your training instead, and about how you knew to sit on the floor. She has been thinking about that." He nodded slowly. "How are you doing?" The question was simple. He asked it the same way he had asked it in the medical bay, without ceremony. Lyra seemed to notice that. The light shade of her skin went slightly warmer. "Better," she said. Same answer as before, but more true now. He was glad to hear it. The fourth day passed quietly, and on the morning of the fifth, the ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and Velhari space spread across the observation deck windows in a way that made all three of them go quiet at once. It was not just one planet. It was a system, warm and golden lit by a sun that was a slightly different shade than Earth's, and the largest planet had rings, not Saturnine rings but closer bands of light and dust that caught the local sun and turned it into color. There were stations in orbit, a shipyard, 3 different vessels in transit that were each larger than anything Nathan had served on. It looked like civilization in the full sense of the word, not a colony or an outpost, but something that had been here for a very long time and had settled into itself completely. "There it is," Cole said quietly beside him. "Yeah," Nathan said. Below them, coming into view as the ship came around on its approach vector, was the planet itself. Blue and green like Earth but different shades, like a painting that used the same colors but in different ratios. Somewhere down, there was a queen who was waiting. Nathan thought about Lyra in the corner of that holding cell, her skin a stressed and shifting gray, her small hand wrapped around two of his fingers. He thought about what she had said on the communication call with her mother. She cries when she is very afraid and very angry and very relieved. All three looked the same from the outside. He straightened his uniform. "Let us go," he said. The descent through the atmosphere of the Velhari home world took 40 minutes, and Nathan spent most of it watching through the viewport as the planet resolved from abstract beauty into specific details. Cities that were built in curves rather than grids, their structures following the natural shapes of the terrain rather than overriding it. Forests that were a deep blue-green, almost teal, with canopies thick enough to look solid from above. Rivers wide and slow and catching the golden sunlight in long gleaming arcs. The landing platform was at the outer edge of what the ship's navigation system labeled the first palace, which Nathan suspected was a translation shortcut for something more specific and grand in the original Velhari. From the platform, it looked less like a palace in any sense he had imagined, and more like a complex of structures that had grown together over centuries, each piece fitting against the next with the ease of things that had long since made peace with each other. A formal welcoming party was waiting when the ramp came down. Nathan had been briefed on what to expect, which helped, but briefings and reality had a way of diverging in his experience. Commander Addies was there, standing with a small group of officials, and Nathan noted, no weapons visible on anyone, which was either very reassuring or very sophisticated depending on how you thought about it. Nathan walked down the ramp with Cole behind him, and Carla behind Cole. He was in his dress uniform, which was as sharp as it was going to get after 4 days in transit. He had polished his boots that morning using a technique his grandmother had taught him, which he thought about briefly and then stopped thinking about because this was not the moment for sentiment. Addies met him at the base of the ramp and performed the formal Velhari greeting, which involved a slight lowering of the head and both hands held palm up for a moment. Nathan had practiced the response twice with the ship's protocol guide. He returned it imperfectly but respectably, and Addies gave him what might have been a look of faint approval. "The Queen will receive you in the receiving hall," Addies said. "It will be a formal reception, which means there will be other guests. This is intended as an honor, not a complication." "I understand," Nathan said. "The princess will be present," Addies added. Something in Nathan's chest settled slightly. He had not realized he was bracing against that possibility until it was removed. "Good," he said. They walked through the outer corridors of the first palace. The staff who passed them moved aside respectfully, and several of them looked at Nathan with an expression he could not fully read, but which felt somewhere between curiosity and something warmer. He wondered how much Lyra had told people. The receiving hall was large. That was the first thing. It was a long room with a ceiling that arched high overhead, and the walls held carvings that Nathan suspected were historical rather than decorative, though he could not read them. The floor was dark and smooth, and the lighting came from sources he could not identify that gave everything a warm and even glow without shadows. There were already guests present, perhaps 40 individuals, not all of them Velhari, and they arranged themselves in a way that left the center of the room clear and the far end open. At the far end, elevated on a shallow platform, was a seat. On that seat sat Queen Sira of the Velhari sovereignty. She was larger in person than she had appeared on the screen. Taller and with a presence that Nathan had no scientific explanation for but felt immediately, the way you felt a change in air pressure before a storm. She was dressed in deep blue, and the ridges along her cheekbones were adorned with something that caught the light and broke it into colors. Her amber eyes were fixed on him from the moment he entered the room. Beside her, one step down and to the right, was Lyra. She was dressed formally now, a small echo of her mother's deep blue, and the jewelry at her neck was more elaborate than what she had worn in the communications call. She was standing very straight, in that way Nathan had come to recognize. She watched him walk the length of the room. He was aware of the other guests watching, too. He kept his pace even, and his hands at his sides and his eyes forward. Cole had told him on the ship that the correct form was to stop at a set distance and wait, and that was what he did. There was a moment of complete quiet. Nathan inclined his head in the formal Velhari greeting he had practiced. It was not perfect, but it was genuine. The Queen stood. She came down from the platform without rushing. She walked toward him with the measured grace of someone who had spent her entire life moving through formal spaces, and as she came closer, Nathan could see what Lyra had tried to describe. The control in her face was extraordinary, a lifetime of practice holding exactly what she wanted held. And underneath it, barely, the thing she was holding back. She stopped 2 steps away from him. She was taller by several inches. She looked at him directly, amber eyes taking him in completely, and Nathan did not flinch. "Corporal Nathan Briggs," she said. "Your Majesty," he said. "You found my daughter." "Yes." "In a holding cell," she said, "in a facility run by the Hollow Chain." "Yes." "You carried no orders to be there for her specifically. You did not know who she was." "That is correct." "You held her hand," she said quietly, "through a dark corridor." It was not a question, but it landed like something more than a statement. "She needed someone to hold her hand," Nathan said. The Queen's composure did something he had not quite seen before. It did not break. It was stronger than that. But it bent, like something very strong under enormous weight, and the bend was visible in the way her eyes changed, in the shifting wave of color across her skin that moved just the way it had on the screen when she had seen Lyra's face. She breathed in slowly. Then she did something that Nathan understood, from the silence in the room and the way the assembled guests responded, was not part of any formal protocol. She stepped forward and placed both of her hands over his, very gently, the way someone holds something they had thought they would never see again. And then the Queen of the Velhari sovereignty, who had stood for years in negotiations without flinching, who had stared down fleet commanders and trade councils and interstellar crises with the calm precision of someone who was made of certainty, lowered her head. And she wept. It was not loud. It was contained and private even in a room full of 40 witnesses. But it was real, and it was undeniable, and the ridges on her cheeks went wide and flat and then rose again, and the color of her skin shifted through the whole range Lyra had described, afraid and angry, and relieved, all of them at once, all of them the same from the outside. Nathan stood still. He did not step back. He did not say anything immediately, because there was nothing that needed to be said. He thought briefly of Lyra on the transport looking up at the stars through the open blast door, of her touching the silver foil of a ration bar to make sure it was real, of her voice, small and wondering, saying, "Fresh air," like it was something she had not expected to be allowed. He thought of the way she had grabbed his hand and not let go. The Queen straightened after a moment. Her composure came back, not all the way, but enough for the room. Her eyes, still amber, still wet, found his face. "I owe you a debt," she said, "that I do not have a word for." "You do not owe me anything," he said. "You rescued my child," she said. "Someone had to," he said, and he meant it without bravado, just the simple arithmetic of the thing. She looked at him for a long time after that. Then she turned to look at Lyra, who had come down from the platform during all of this and was standing a few feet away. Lyra's skin was the warmest shade Nathan had seen from her, and the ridges on her cheeks were up, and her amber eyes were very bright. "He sat on the floor," Lyra told her mother. The Queen looked back at Nathan. "My daughter has told me many things about you," she said. "That is the detail she returns to most." It seemed like the right call at the time, he said. Something in the Queen's expression shifted into something that was not quite a smile in the human sense, but was something, a softening of the formal architecture of her face into something more direct and more real. "Stay," she said. "There is much I would like to understand." He thought about the briefing room on Station Halcyon, and Major Shade's expression, and the formal diplomatic inquiry, and Cole's voice saying, "You say yes." "Yes, Your Majesty," he said. She nodded. Then she did something else that was not in the protocol. She looked around the room at her assembled guests and officials, and she said, in a voice that carried the full weight of her authority and something additional that Nathan recognized as pride, "This is the soldier who brought Lyra home." The room changed. It was not applause because the Velhari did not have the same gesture. It was something with the hands and the ridges and the skin, a collective shift of color and movement that spread through the assembled guests like a wave, and Nathan did not entirely understand it, but he felt it the way you feel agreement, or recognition, or welcome. Lyra appeared beside him. She tilted her head up to look at him with those amber eyes. "I told you," she said quietly, in standard language meant just for him. "She would like you better for the fear." "Was she afraid?" he asked just as quietly. "Every day," Lyra said, "for 6 weeks, yes." He thought about that. "Me too," he said, which was not something he said easily or often, but it was true. Every day of the raid planning and the intelligence work and the transit and the communications calls and the briefings, there had been a version of fear underneath it, not for himself, but for whether this particular thing was going to work out the way it needed to. Lyra's skin went warmer again. She nodded as if she had already known. They had dinner that evening in a smaller room than the receiving hall, with fewer guests and more actual conversation, and Nathan spent 3 hours talking to people whose names he was going to have to review from the audio record later. The Queen sat at the far end of the table and across the room, and asked him questions that were precise and thoughtful and clearly built on research she had done personally. She asked about his training. She asked what he had seen in the holding cell specifically. She asked why he had sat on the floor. He answered all of it honestly. At one point she asked, "Did you know that she was important?" He considered the question. "No," he said. "I knew she was scared and alone and small and had probably been there a long time. That was enough." The Queen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, that is the part I have been thinking about." Later, when most of the guests had gone and the room was quieter, Cole appeared beside Nathan with a glass of something that the Velhari had confirmed was safe for human consumption, which Nathan appreciated someone checking. "So," Cole said. "So," Nathan agreed. "Big day," Cole said. "Yeah." Cole looked around the room, at the carved walls and the warm light and the Velhari officials quietly finishing their conversations, and at Lyra across the room sitting with her mother, their heads closed together, the Queen's hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You did a good thing," Cole said. Nathan looked at Lyra and her mother. The Queen was saying something, and Lyra was listening with her full attention, and the ridges on both of their faces were in the same position, up and easy, which Nathan had figured out by now was the comfortable version. "Yeah," he said, "somebody had to." "Stop saying it like it was nothing," Cole said without heat. "It was not nothing," Nathan said. "It was just the job." "The job does not usually end here," Cole said. He was not wrong about that. Nathan drank the Velhari Safe for Humans beverage, which tasted like fruit and something mineral and was not bad at all, and he watched a mother hold her daughter's shoulder and talk quietly and not have to be afraid anymore. The receiving hall had been formal and large and correct in all the diplomatic ways, but it was this, a smaller room and a quieter evening and a mother and daughter with their heads together, that felt like the actual end of the thing. The actual weight of what had been in that holding cell 6 weeks ago, and what it had cost, and what had been given back. He thought about his grandmother and the boots. He thought about the smell of rust and cold metal in a room lit by red emergency lights. He thought about a small hand wrapping around two of his fingers in the dark. Some things you carry. Not heavily, not with bitterness, but just carry the way you carry anything that mattered. The weight of it is not a burden. It is just evidence that the thing was real. Lyra looked up from across the room and found his face. She raised one hand in a small and specific gesture that he did not know the translation of, but which felt, without needing translation, like something between a thank you and a promise. He raised his hand back. And above the planet of the Velhari sovereignty, where the rings of that ancient world caught the golden light and broke it into colors, and where a queen had wept without shame in front of her court because her daughter was home, the stars were out. The same stars as always, there for everyone. And,